Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Bogues. I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. A few months ago, Ray and a couple of other people came to see me to talk about the work of the center and what kind of work the center could do in not outreach, which I think is a horrible word, but in trying to work with the community. And one of the things that we discussed at that meeting, and we had worked together on some other things, was that it may be useful for the center to host jointly with community organizations forums on issues that the community wanted to discuss. In other words, that we wouldn't at the center say that these are the issues to be discussed, but that the communities would tell us what are the issues, and then we could work on who the speakers might be together, and work together on format and venue and things like that. And one of the issues that came up, and then he was joined by his other colleagues on this, was that we needed to have a discussion about white supremacy. And so we decided to plan this particular forum. We had planned it earlier for an earlier date, but the venue was not available. And the colleagues here from the community around the table made the point that they wanted to have it in Rites and Reason and not in the other venue that we had agreed on, because this wasn't available, because there was a theater performance on the day that we had wanted it. My hope is that, and I know this is, I think is the hope of the folks who we have worked with as well, is that this is the first in a series of forums in which both the community and the Center for Slavery and Justice, and therefore Brown University, will be engaged in opening a set of conversations around issues that are important to the Providence and to the Rhode Island community in general. So on behalf of the Center for Slavery and Justice, I welcome you to this first forum. I hope that, as I said, that this will be the first of many. I hope to see you all at the other forums. I would say in relationship to the center that we are very open to the community, that you can, I think some of you may have already seen that, you can walk in anytime to us and have a set of ideas, and we will try to see if we can work with you to make those ideas those ideas a reality. So on behalf of the center again, welcome to you all, and I turn it over to Ray. So welcome.
Which is to say, good evening, friends, in the traditional Algonquin language of the Narragansetts. My name is Raymond Two Hawks Watson. I am both executive director of the Mount Hope Neighborhood Association and Pumham Sachem of the historic Mashpog Narragansett tribe, which is the indigenous peoples from the Narragansett Nation that called the Providence area home, going all the way back to 1643 and before that. Before I move forward, I do want to acknowledge and thank Professor Bogues and Shanna for their fantastic support, for helping us bring this together. So if we could just have a quick round of applause for them and the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. And I would also like to acknowledge Dr. Warren Simmons, head of the Annenberg Institute, a good friend and mentor of mine, for attending as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Simmons. This is actually the third time Mount Hope has collaborated with an entity here at Brown. Last year we did 2 forums with the Africana Studies Department, one around Dr. Martin Luther King, and then the second, I don't remember what the second one was about. Racial profiling. 2 very well received forums, so we wanted to continue that relationship, and fortunately the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice was in full support of that, so here we are tonight. One of the things that we discussed, just to briefly go over what the format will be tonight, was that we didn't want this to be a sort of situation where it was a bunch of talking heads on a panel and we sit and listen to them pontificate about whatever they're going to pontificate about. So the structure that we'll be using tonight is, in a moment, I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists. Then we will go down the row and ask them each to give a 3 to 5 minute definition of what white privilege is and why they define it that way. And then we want to open the forum up for conversation with the community. We think it's very important that we engage in critical dialogue about these sorts of issues, because it's not just an academic thing. These are things that actually play out in the community. And we really saw this as an opportunity for both the community and the academic world to kind of intersect, to see how we can collaboratively begin to address these issues. So on behalf of the Mount Hope Neighborhood Association, Providence Youth Student Movement, and the Providence Africana Reading Collective, we do thank you for coming out to support us this evening. And with no further ado, I'm just going to give brief introductions of our panelists here. First and foremost, we have Marco McWilliams, founder of the Providence Africana Reading Collective. Marco, would you give a quick wave? We have Chanravy Proeung, co-director of the Providence Youth Student Movement. Chanravy, give a quick wave. Professor Matt Guterl, chair of the Department of American Studies. Professor. And lastly, but most certainly not least, Professor Geri Augusto, visiting associate professor of Africana Studies. So we really want to just kind of get into the dialogue, so I'm going to just turn the microphone over to Professor Guterl and ask if he would be so kind as to start us off here. Thank you very much, Professor.
I knew that if I sat on the left, I'd have to go first. Can you all hear me? No. All right, you got it. How's that? Better? So I remember being here as a postdoctoral fellow almost 10 years ago at a conference on whiteness that was held in Wilson Hall, and it was a very different kind of conference. It wasn't a community organized conference, but it was a conference nonetheless on what had come to be called white privilege, and it began with the classic Peggy McIntosh definition of the invisible knapsack of things available to people who are marked or socially positioned as white in society. And it was a great event, but at the end of it, the question was, well, what's the result here and where are we going? And I think our general sense as a group, and there were roughly this number of people there, was that the problem would be with us for some time and that it wasn't going to be going away. As a historian, I couldn't help but think and reflect in the years that passed after that, because I kept thinking about that conference, that privilege has a certain kind of history. And what I mean by that is that what we've come to understand as white privilege as a particular kind of obliviousness or an absence of awareness on the part of people who are white to their privileged position in society and the sorts of material, social, biological benefits they have in life in these United States, that obliviousness comes and goes over time. Right? That if you went back to Mississippi in 1851, you'd find very little obliviousness to the power of whiteness and to the position of white people in society. If you went to New York in 1921, you'd find very little obliviousness, very little of what Peggy McIntosh might want to call that invisible knapsack. And if you went, as the cover on the flyer suggests, down to Mississippi in 1961, you'd find very little sense that whiteness was not visible, present, marked on the material artifacts of Jim Crow. So I'm interested in the ways in which our contemporary conversations about white privilege are the product of a particular moment. And I'm very keen to understand that moment as not a logical sequence in some sort of liberal teleology where things get better and all that's left of racism is just the after effects of Jim Crow. So all the signs have been stripped away and what's left are just these little tiny privileges. I want to think very seriously about privilege as something baked into the firmament in this place that has, again, real profound material and biopolitical consequences for people. So, 3 minutes?
Marco McWilliams.
Everyone hear me okay? When we imagine this idea, this notion of white privilege, how do we think about not just right, so if we take Peggy McIntosh's moment, and these sort of subtle, sort of maybe microaggressions, someone might think of them, or the ways in which whiteness plays out in society by a set of advantages. But what are the structures? What are the systems that are in place that actually sustain that social reality and not only make it so, but then how does this thing continue to reproduce itself generation after generation? Such that no matter at which point you start in this timeline, you find it hovering. At moments, it's asserting itself. At other moments, it's just kind of chilling. But then it can sort of jump up and resurge again. We saw this in Obama's election. And then if we climb up yet another level, what are the ideological structures that sustain the system? The thing that the system eats in order to keep living? And what is the rhetoric that pushes out the ideology? Not just like how do we talk like the words that we say, but how do the words that we say ascribe meaning? And then how does that meaning then get encoded into our structures, into our systems? I might open up with just a simple example that wouldn't readily appear as white privilege. Now, I know, and many of you students here at Brown, and if you go to RISD, that if you go to AS 220 on certain events, all you need to do is show your student ID, and you can get into particular events, either for free or at a reduced rate. And this is not the same if you go to certain other institutions here in the state, maybe a CCRI or Rhode Island College. Or maybe we don't say AS 220, maybe we did RIPTA, you're taking public transportation. Now, if you're a student here at Brown, I think you just get on the bus and kind of show your ID, right? And you just ride. That's something that was set up with RIPTA by the institution. It's not the same case at RIC. You can use your student ID, but you have to pay a rate that is 50% more than what a student at RISD or Brown would pay. What are you saying? Why? It's not white privilege. That's just an economic deal that was worked out between the institution. Now, we can talk about the color demographics at the institution. That's okay. We know how this works. But what interests me is, obviously it interests me like who can ride and who can't, but how did the structure get set up such that who can ride and who can't comes to be, and then why is it that we think of that as kind of like a normal thing, like that's just how it works? Like it's not anybody's fault. If your school has that deal, then great, you have that deal and you can ride. But what if we critically challenge these little examples like this that turn out to be not so little, of like, yo, I mean, I don't know how to feel about that. I go to RIC and I can't just get on the bus and ride like a RISD student can. And what does that mean? And how did whatever that means come to mean that? And then why do people sort of maybe resist but not? This is the thing that interests me. What are the definitions behind these little systems, and how do they come into place?
Thank you very much, Marco. Chanravy Proeung.
All right, so I'm gonna break the ice a little bit because it's a little nerve-wracking. There's all these lights in my face. I've never met some of these people here, so it's hard to have a conversation and be personable. I know that they're live streaming it, so I said, what's up? Say hi. My name is Chanravy, and I want to do a quick, I would say, I guess, privilege check, right? So if you think you attribute to white privilege, please clap your hands very loudly. Wait, hold on. Just wait. When I say so, when I count to 3, please clap as loud as you can. If you think that you attribute to white privilege, uphold white supremacy, or have gained some power from it in society, please clap your hand and be very honest, because we're in the Rights and Reasons Theater. Come on. When I say 3, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, okay, that's a decent amount of folks up in here. Helps me kind of socially construct like my dialogue in this space, but it helps me kind of get a sense of like where folks are too, right? So I'm gonna give it to you guys the way I see it. It makes me a little bit more comfortable for folks to kind of acknowledge, right, their white privilege. Makes it a little bit more comfortable for us to speak about it, because you have to understand, as community members and people living in Providence and in Rhode Island and are from urban neighborhoods or the hood, it is not easy to sit on a panel and talk about white privilege, but it's also not easy to be on Brown campus, navigate Brown campus, being that like I am from a working class family, first generation Cambodian American, activist, organizer, and I have my crew over here. So, I had to come reinforce my people, because I was not gonna come in this battle alone. So I think that white privilege is an uneven distribution of power within society, right? That exists in all aspects of life and accepted by the world. And it goes without scrutiny or suspicion, that upholds white supremacy, white patriarchy, and heterosexism. That's my definition.
Thank you very much, Chanravy. And Professor Augusto.
Okay. I want to thank the organizers for asking me, I think, but it was an invitation that I thought a lot about, because it's the kind of invitation that normally I would not accept. I would not accept because, as a now retired activist, but still able to remember some of the principles, one of them is you don't drift in or drop in to a group of community organizers and philosophize, pontificate, speak, or say anything. So it's an invitation that I would have preferred to come and listen to, and that is exactly what I will be doing most of the time. However, I thought I might bring something that actually comes from popular culture. It's not connected to any kind of academic work, Jose. And I will speak, this is heresy, but I'm going to speak here as a black mother, not as an academic professor. So I was thinking white privilege and the other side, absence of that privilege. So I was thinking, what does a black mother who is not privy to white privilege have that differentiates her from another mother who might have the privilege of white privilege? And so I have a poster here representing every black mother's fear, mine too. I have 3 grown black sons. Surveillance, arbitrary murder, incarceration. The poster that you're looking at is not from the United States. If you can see the small writing there, it's actually from Brazil, where I do some work. I was told maybe in the discussion something about international might come up, so I wanted to drop it in. But the poster, as you can see, is a black youth on a slab in a mortuary. And the reason why this is on a poster used by activist organizers, Afro-Brazilians who are organizing against violence against black youth, is because it is such a common experience. And I wanted to show it because it shows that this question of white privilege is also an international question, and that the fear of black mothers is also a transnational black question. A lot of the same things that happen in the favelas in Brazil happen here. So now, Josette, if you can just, the other part of what I have to say, which obviously is not me saying it, is a video clip, which comes from a kind of a popular discussion that's going around that I was sent on a listserv. She's going to skip the ad.
Explosive case, one of the stars of Grey's Anatomy, Jesse Williams. We are very delighted to have Jesse with us tonight here on this show. Thank you for joining us. This is a case that has captivated the nation. Everybody waiting on pins and needles to find out what this jury is going to do. So far, they've deliberated 11 hours and 43 minutes. Why is this case important to you?
Well, I think it's important because people are tired. I think people feel tired of this criminalization of the black body. I mean, it's a tradition in this country, and people are kind of just feeling fatigued about constantly having to go through this all year, every year, since the beginning of this, the founding of this nation. This is a tradition in this country when people are able to go ahead and kill black people because they got sassed, because we were inconvenienced, and we become a victim of a fantasy. Your fantasy somehow has become more, obviously I don't mean you, but this fantasy of what the black body does and can do has become more important than the reality, and we pay for it with our bodies, and it's disconcerting, obviously.
Well, I mean, some would hope that cases like this are an aberration and that the arc toward justice is slow and bumpy, but it aims toward progress and equality and justice. We have an African-American president. I mean, as an African-American man, do you feel any stress as a result of cases like this?
Stress?
Well, in other words, that it affects your day-to-day life. Cases like the George Zimmerman case,
Sure it
cases
does.
like how?
Sure it does. Well, I mean, and I will say, obviously, better than awful is an improvement, I guess, but it's still awful. And so these things are certainly going to continue to be frustrating. I think also what I find, people that I talk to, I spend a lot of my time doing a lot of work around creating opportunity, access, and education for people of color, particularly black males. And in the conversations that I'm having and the work that we're doing, we find that people are also looking to find support and not feel like we're the only ones, and kind of tired of feeling like this is a black problem. It's not a black problem, this is a white problem. This is an American problem, this is a societal problem where people should be outraged when a man is able to instigate an interaction with kids and then shoot them when it doesn't go well. It should be an outrage for everybody. We shouldn't have to, people were certain that OJ was guilty, positive, and we cracked jokes about it for years, but people are kind of on the fence and kind of, cowering in break rooms and not talking about this case. I think it was really telling that the defense attorney today said that this would really even be a household case if it wasn't for the Zimmerman trial, which really goes a long way to explain that how much the indifference around black life. So we're only talking about this not because a life was lost or because a man shot 10 bullets into a car full of children, but because of some other case. I mean, that says more about him than anybody else.
Well, it's interesting because you're a star of Grey's Anatomy, and many feel that we do have a two-tiered system of justice in this country, but it's one for the rich and famous and the other for everybody else. And a lot of people think that the criteria for being treated favorably in the courts isn't so much race as it is power, privilege, fame, wealth. You would, under any criteria, be considered part of the power privilege group. You're famous,
Sure.
You're handsome, you're a star, a hit show. Why do you feel also perhaps disenfranchised despite all your success?
Because I don't think of just me, I think of a collective group of people, and while privilege is very real, whether it's a class issue that obviously exists, I think that's another thing, I'm glad you bring that up, because this idea of having to explain why it's racial while we're standing in our own blood is silly, I think. It's racial because it doesn't happen to white people. Because look at the crack laws, look at the fact that 51% of crack users are white, but 95% of the people in jail for crack use are black. Look at the fact that prison is one of the most profitable and growing industrial complexes in this country, and they now have for-profit prisons that have a mandated 90% occupancy rate to make money. This is an industry, and these are all fingers on the hand of a gross injustice that's been happening in this country. It has not stopped. We're waiting for it to stop, and that will feel like a triumph. But it's not. There is no question that race is an issue when you look at the amount of boys that are being shot because you feel scared. The idea that feeling threatened is not the same thing as being threatened. It's not the same thing. We pretend that it is, but it's not. This fantasy that the boogeyman's out to get you. What if he was playing Bon Jovi? What if he was blasting Bon Jovi in that parking lot? Would he be able to have his life then? Would that be okay when he's got a thumbs up and this drunk can go walk back into, and I say drunk because he's drunk, not a criticism of people who are alcoholic, but if you're going to the gas station to get wine after having several rums, that he would have got a thumbs up and kept walking and would be able to keep his life then. I mean, this is preposterous. I think that's the frustration that a lot of Americans are feeling, a lot of folks that I'm talking to, is that we have to keep fighting to be heard and to be treated as human beings. This is not close, this case. This guy is a sociopath. He goes to jail. Next. Like this.
We'll have to see what the jury decides. The jury
Yeah, and that's, by the way, it's not, I don't guarantee that that's gonna be the outcome. That's just my personal opinion.
Okay. So I thought I would throw that in. It's not an academic view. It is very much tied with how popular culture is wrestling with the questions, and I think he raises not necessarily definitions and perspectives that we would all agree with, but I thought it would be interesting to just throw that into the mix rather than have me give any more definitions. And that's it.
All right, so I'm going to slide over to this side of the room because ideally what we want is for the audience to kind of engage in this dialogue with our panelists. So I'm going to start by just asking a simple question to our panelists, and feel free to answer however you'd like. And then anyone on that side of the room who wants to make a comment, ask a question, please just make your way up to the microphone. I just ask that you wait to be acknowledged before you start speaking. And anyone on this side, just raise your hand and I'll get the microphone over to you. And we really want to engage and have some conversation about this. So let me start with this question here. What is the difference between white privilege and white supremacy? And why do you say that that's the difference? Making eye contact.
You were reaching for the mic.
So I think that when you say white supremacy, and those of you that know me know I say white supremacy a lot. I love saying white supremacy. When you say white supremacy, what it allows is for a lot of white folk to take their white privilege and abscond. They're like, oh, white supremacy, nah, that's not me. That's like Klan, Mississippi, 1955, that's not me. But now when you say white privilege, this is a little different question, right? You look at your skin, right? It's not like whether you have like a white sheet and a hood in the closet. It's like, oh, white privilege, okay, that's me. And now you have to wrestle with that phrase, with that idea differently than when you say white supremacy. So for me, this difference leads down a different track about, in many ways, the same conversation, but how that conversation is had is different when you say white privilege.
Yeah, just to second that very quickly, I think those two terms, I mean, I would collapse them, but I think in public discourse, they're class-inflected in really powerful ways. And we assume that white supremacy is, you know, kind of Jerry Springer phenomena with all sorts of, you know, Ku Kluxers and pickup trucks and Confederate flags. And we assume that white privilege is a kind of bourgeois phenomena. And I don't acknowledge that, but I think that's generally the way we conceptualize it.
Were it not for white supremacy, would there be white privilege?
Good question.
I think that when you talk about white supremacy and white privilege, it's a culturally appropriate way of communicating in a nice way, I think, right? It's saying, hey, you have some privilege and you have some power, but I'm going to say it in a nice way to you. But it's really, it's white supremacy, and it's a power dynamic. It's a resource, it's an economic, it's, you know, playing into these systems that are, you know, existing and working for white supremacy, I think. And I want to say thank you for showing that video and saying, you know, you wanted to listen, because one of the things that, you know, I was going through a bunch of articles, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just not going to sit here and talk about white privilege and, you know, start feeling bad for people because I really don't care, and I want to be able to give some resolutions and some steps towards building, you know, in the community, but also, you know, in the activist community where these types of racial tensions and like nonprofit world and institutions, that stuff really comes up, you know, that privilege stuff comes up. I remember getting a Mayday email where an older white man, gay older white man, had sent out a very messed up, racist joke about Asian women in Vietnam, and talking about Asian women being, you know, sex workers during the Vietnam War and all these things, and they were all laughing. And it was all these white activists and white organizers. I'm just like, I'm gonna swear. I'm like, that's bullshit. And like, this is in our movement world now. This is what we call the movement, the struggle, in which like it's okay to do those things. No, it's not okay. I think that those dynamics, I think, really have to be addressed. So.
Thank you. Let me pose a question to the audience, and it's actually going to be the exact question that Professor Augusto posed. Would there be white privilege were it not for white supremacy? Anyone brave enough to be our first representative from the audience to say a few words? I don't mind picking people. If you look nervous, I'll bring the mic right over to you. So.
This row right here, this area.
I know. Come on, we got the dear folks
I
over
know,
here.
yeah.
So, yeah. Anyone?
The panel can pick. We can do like a panel pick.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, we're free flowing here. So if you see someone who you think has a great answer, point them out, and I'll bring the mic over to them.
I mean, I see some people from, different organizations in the room. I see like
Right.
leaders in the room,
We got someone. All right, we got someone right there.
Yay.
If you kindly would you also state your name and if you represent an organization as well?
I'm May Verano. I'm a first year here at Brown. I would say that white supremacy is being acknowledgeable, or like to acknowledge the idea that you have this power, but white privilege is having the ability to be oblivious to this power that you have and continue on your day. Because I feel that people of color, people who don't have white privilege, even though they might not be educated in their struggle or have the academic background of understanding everything that's happened to their people, they are still faced with these struggles, and they don't have the opportunity to remain oblivious.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts, comments, concerns on that statement? Panelists, care to respond to that?
No, I mean, part of white privilege is the privilege to not to have to talk about it. That's very clear.
I don't know that it's, the obliviousness is like a part of it, so we conceptualize it as obliviousness, but I don't think white people are really oblivious to their whiteness or to their white privilege. I think they're quite conscious about it and quite aware of it. They may not talk about it publicly and they may keep it to themselves, but in private, white people talk about whiteness all the time, and they talk about race all the time. It's not a secret, it's not something they're unaware of. It's inflected in the culture they consume, and it's a part of the material existence of their lives, and they cherish it and enjoy it. To call it obliviousness is to make it, to immunize them from a critique, and to recognize that they're not oblivious to it is to expose them to a critique.
Did you have your hand up? You sure? I think I saw your hand up, but I'll let you slide. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sarath. I'm the co-director of the Province Youth Student Movement also. And for me, white supremacy, is, the difference for me is that white supremacy is very connected to this idea of violence and enforcing power. So white supremacy to me looks like a young person being stopped by a police because of the color of their skin. White privilege to me is whether or not that young person can get away with it and walk away without being locked up or arrested.
So it's, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not only the action, but also the outcome from the action as well. Okay, what does everyone think about that? Audience members, panelists, what do you think about that statement? It's not just the action, but also the outcome of the action. Oh, you guys are a stiff bunch, goodness. Dave, how you doing over there, brother? All right. Hold on. All right, 1 second.
Ray, you're gonna be running around back and forth.
I tell you, you're gonna be standing most of the time.
Never mind. Take the mic back. So for me, white supremacy is a set of values and beliefs that essentially maintain that white people are superior, innately, culturally, otherwise, right? White privilege is a set of policies and practices and resources that place white people on the beneficial side of the achievement gap, whether it's economic, whether it's educational, right? So in essence, you can actually be a beneficiary of white privilege without being a white supremacist, right? I mean, so that's one of the ways that you can sort of say, well, I'm not a white supremacist. So the fact that I benefit from a set of policies that are normative in this country is not my fault, right? And so I think we have to disentangle, I'm a black supremacist, right? Unfortunately, there's no such thing as black privilege, right? So I can believe all day long that black people are better, we do this and this and that, but I don't have a set of institutional policies and practices that actually enact that without me having to even think about it and make an effort towards it, right? And that's the distinction between white supremacy, set of beliefs, you can see it manifested, negatively and vehemently. I think you actually saw some of it manifested in the questions of the reporter, who was basically questioning whether race was really the issue, or something else. Aren't you a beneficiary of that? And the final thing I'll say is that in fact you can be something other than white and benefit from white privilege, right? Maybe not to the same extent as white people do. I mean, I experienced that myself, right? Growing up in East Harlem, poor family, definitely not a beneficiary of white privilege. As I rose through the economic ladder, I got access to privileges. I became an honorary white person, right? I got access to knowledge that white people have that we typically don't have about mortgage rates and redlining and kinds of supports that you can use to get your child into Brown, the kinds of knowledge, policies, and practices that white people, particularly privileged white people, have access to that maintains their status without them having to have a negative attitude toward anyone, right? So I think it's important to separate the two, because if you don't disentangle them, do you think that getting rid of white supremacist attitudes is all you need to do to get rid of white privilege? And that's not it. That you actually have to analyze a set of policies, practices, and structures that advantage white people all the time, and some of the rest of us, right, who decide to play the cultural game as best we can, and unpack them and deconstruct them to actually get rid of the achievement gaps in multiple dimensions, and hope that white supremacy will go away. But it may never. But what I'm most concerned about are those institutional policies and practices that, whether you are a supremacist or not, actually privilege your group in relationship to another.
Great.
Thank you very much. Yes?
I think that comment is very interesting because I grew up in a family that is part of the Southern Freedom Movement, otherwise known as the Civil Rights Movement, and closest to CORE and SNCC, which would have been more radical organizations. And the interesting thing that we were always taught was that white supremacy wasn't an attitude. White supremacy was precisely what you've defined as white privilege. White supremacy was a structure and a set of institutions that sat right there. It was definable. It touched people's lives in every way. That was white supremacy. There is a structural and institutional and systemic there's a set of those dimensions to white supremacy. And privilege was an outcome or a product or something that you could enjoy or not, therefrom. But that white supremacy was something very real, very tangible, very systemic, very institutional. And I wonder if historically we could say that maybe that's not true now, but at one time, for sure, it was true. And I think that if we looked at a place like South Africa, or if we looked at Brazil, the institutions that are the institutions of white supremacy are extremely tangible, extremely systemic. Attitude is the least of it.
Well, the reason why I would separate the two is because if you remember in the early days of the civil rights movement, there was an attempt to address white supremacy by changing simply the attitudes of people, right? Attitudes of black people towards themselves. Feel better about yourself. Choose that black doll, not that white doll, right? Change the attitudes of white people, right? Stop thinking that way. Don't call me that word, right? And you can actually have some success in changing behaviors and in changing attitudes and even values. But if you don't deconstruct those institutional policies and practices, the results will be remarkably the same, even as we walk around with a different set of values and attitudes. And so I think I think a mistake we made is to conflate the attitudes and values with the institutional practices and structures, and thinking if you remove one, the other will follow, and it fundamentally doesn't.
Dave had his hand up over there. Give me 1 second.
There's one over there. There's one right there.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, you guys are the best.
I'm trying to figure out, maybe there's a misinterpretation or of how we're looking at the term white supremacy, but I'm trying to figure out, how do you have white privilege without white supremacy? I mean, white supremacy existed from the time of Aristotle and Socrates, and you know, it's built from there on. I don't know how you separate the two. That's my question. I don't see an ability to say, okay, one is this and one is that. You can't have white privilege without white supremacy, to me. I don't know how people can draw that distinction between the two.
Any responses to that statement?
It's not so much a response, but I think we've been dancing around deconstructing some of these systems so that people have clear examples of what we're talking about. So I was wondering if the panel could do some of that.
So to be clear, you would like the panel to do some deconstructing of examples of white privilege versus white supremacy?
Just deconstructing.
Those systems that we've been talking about, how those systems are attributed to white privilege, or what systems we're talking about, examples of those systems.
Okay. Hold on. We're gonna go with the mic. We want to make sure everyone hears.
What about that? Gonna get tired.
Yeah.
So at
Just
the
leave it on the
Annenberg
mic.
Institute, we do lots of work in urban education systems, right? The clarion call of this country is that we're in the middle of the standards movement. We're holding all kids, accountable for meeting high academic standards, and we say all means all, right? So that's sort of an attitudinal shift, right? We're no longer saying the only black kids can only be basic skills, white kids can be, high and advanced. We're saying all means all, right? So that's a way of saying, as a country, we're no longer going to foster educational segregation, right? We have tests that hold people accountable, right? You look at almost every district, and what they have is a system of selective high schools, right? That you have to test to get into. Those high schools get more resources. I mean, Boston Latin even has an endowment, for God's sakes, right? How does a public high school have an endowment, right? Which means the kids that go to that school get access to far more resources, fiscal and otherwise, than the kids in other Boston public schools, right? So how do you have selective high schools that have richer curriculum, more field trips, relationships with colleges and universities that operate in a system where the majority of the students are black and Latino, but most of the students in the selective high schools in almost any urban community are white, right? And at the same time, a national mantra of state policy that says we have standards and we're holding all students accountable, right? So in essence, the mantra of standards is a way of us saying as a nation, we no longer believe in ability grouping. We no longer believe that white people are innately superior academically and intellectually to black people. And we're now going to hold all kids accountable for meeting the same set of standards. We've made an attitudinal change, right? But at the same time, we have a whole bunch of policies and practices in place that continue to sort and select kids into privileged academic programs that benefit mostly white kids and economically advantaged kids, and inferior academic programs where poor kids, Black and Latino kids, and Asian kids are largely confined, right? That is, for me, an example of a nation under a president who's Black, right? Somebody said, we have a Black president, right? And he's all for high standards for all, but we have allowed a set of policies and practices that actually distribute fiscal and academic resources in ways that advantage white kids. And unless that's deconstructed, it's here in Providence, classical high school. Some of y'all went there. People of color, some of y'all skipped by. Some of y'all benefited from white privilege. That's what I'm saying, right? So they let some of y'all in, right? But by and large, the kids who get in classical are kids of privilege, right? And it's a way of unequally distributing public resources. So that's just in education. But you have that in Boston. This starts as early as 2nd to 3rd grade, where kids are selected for programs that prepare them to take and pass those tests, right? And certain parents know which schools have those programs and have the power to get those kids in those programs. And it starts as early as 2nd grade. And then in high school, it's like, oh, well, this isn't white privilege. This is just, these kids work harder, they study harder. That's why they're in the programs. If you want to get in these programs, work harder and study harder. No, that is not the only reason, right? There are a set of policies and structures in place that produce the gaps that we attribute to something else beyond race and power.
Ray, let me just say quickly, I'll piggyback on that school model, and we'll just bring it right here, right home, right here in the state of Rhode Island, in Providence. Last year, the ACLU in Rhode Island here came out with a report. It's called Blacklisted, and what it did was documented the suspension rates among racial demographics right here in the schools here in the city. And as we can all guess, you can Google it and you can find a report right now. It's right online, freely readable. It's not even that long. And it shows quite clearly the demographic numbers of the kids who are most suspended, starting from, I think, like the 1st grade, right on through. And of course, this brings up this notion of the school to prison pipeline. Now, to be observed, it's like, well, maybe those kids are misbehaving. What are we supposed to do? I was in a school once, and I don't even remember what I was doing there, but there were a group of teachers that was coming there. The students were going to be teachers, and they were sort of mentoring in this classroom. And the head teacher was explaining to them, and she was a white teacher, and the students were all Latino, and she was kind of explaining what she did in her job and this sort of thing. And I was standing behind them, and I overheard this part of the conversation. And she says, but you know, sometimes one of the main problems that I have is that these kids just don't know how to sit down. I don't know if it's something in their culture or something, but they're just different. They don't know how to sort of sit down and behave, you know, and then she went on. And that her default setting was to go to this neo-racist, like, it's just cultural. It's something that happens in their home. They just don't know how to sit their asses down. This was the worldview. This was how she saw this, and she brought that into the classroom. And so everything else, you know, what's that saying? If the only thing you have is a hammer, then every problem starts to look like a nail. And so it's like, so that's here in Providence. And when you look at the report, you can see that incredibly disproportionate. There's a huge disparity in the suspension rates. And you know, in school, that follows you, right? That goes on your record. So that, you know, as you get older, you get into high school, the first time you get into sort of tiny little bit of major trouble, they look, oh, he's been getting in trouble in school anyway, all the time. We were in a meeting at DARE, we had a behind the walls meeting, and this came up. The gentleman said he was a Latino, he said he was going to pick up his grandson from school, he was in the 1st grade, and the teacher, whoever's in the class, he was like young, like 19, and he's like, you know, my kid's in the 1st grade, like what could possibly be the problem? Why am I coming to pick him up? And he gets there and she said he was jumping around. And he's like, you call me to the school because he was jumping around? He's in the 1st grade? And you probably don't even have children. Like, you're so young, like, what am I supposed to do with this information? That, you know, this happens in these little ways, and we don't see it as connected to these other things until, like, a report comes out. And it's like, oh, okay.
I think to piggyback off you, there's different ways to approach like addressing white privilege and deconstructing white supremacy and white privilege. And from my learned experiences, but like this is somewhat theoretical, right? Some of the ideological ways like we've worked in like organizing grassroots stuff to like the actual experiences of real people and people on the street. There's a huge difference. I think that report, right, is very true, and I've read it, and that is a cultural way. There's a culture in the system in which teachers are taught to deal with students of color, right? Mm-hmm. There's a culture and a system that's in place that we have to address through policy and through addressing the teachers themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So there's multiple ways to address that. To deconstruct, and this is my opinion, I think that like we can have this conversation, we can have it dive a little deeper, is one from an anti-racist lens. I think that it has to come from real healing, healing from trauma, from communities of color, healing from this crazy thing called white guilt, which I don't really want to admit that there's really white guilt, because that's a different issue. That's internal stuff for me. There's interpersonal relationships in which how we interact with each other, and that's how we treat each other in schools, in systems, in nonprofits and institutions and things like that, right? And there's like systemic and institutional ways like policy changes, disciplinary changes and stuff like that. But there's also a level of consensual agreement, right, that people have to really talk about. Consensual agreement meaning, like, we have to be honest about the tension that it exists between communities of color, between, people who, like, have white privilege and are white supremacists, right? We have to have those real conversations, right? Because to communities of color, white supremacy is an act of violence, like Sarath said. It is an act of violence. It's systemic violence. It's street violence. It's institutional violence, and that causes a lot of stress, it causes a lot of depression, it causes a mental illness, it causes people to culturally accept that it's okay for a black male to be shot. That is not okay. It's okay for the Providence Police Department to have a gang list of all Southeast Asian youth. No, it's not okay. It's okay for young people to be searched and for police officers to seize things. It's an act of violence. And I think that for us as a community and in Providence to address these acts of violence, we have to have honest conversations like dialogues like this, right? Healing and conflict resolution becomes part of addressing trauma and addressing rage and anger, right? Because if we don't have honest conversations and consensual communications between one another, that's when the communication isn't clear. It's like a bad relationship. Has anybody been in a bad relationship? Come on, like really? Like it's communication, right? So if you cannot create clarity, right, and commitment to change the culture and change systems, we won't get anywhere. And to help folks heal from what has been hurting us, especially from communities of color, like there is real pain. The civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the movements outside in Cuba, the movements outside in Southeast Asia, there's people that died. There's people that got shot, okay? There's people, mass murders that happen. This is systemic white supremacy and colonialism. You have to understand that. And our communities have been struggling and have been trying to heal, but this oppression keeps continuing, right? And it becomes a barrier to healing. It becomes a barrier to creating clear cultural communications between one another, right? And when you start miscommunicating what you're trying to say, there's wars, right? Because we're not clear about what we want from each other. We're not addressing the true privileges, the white supremacy, the messed up policies. Like we dehumanize like people. We dehumanize the Black experience. We dehumanize people of color experiences. We dehumanize folks and be like, oh, well, it's their fault. It's easy to look and say, oh, it's our fault. But it's harder to kind of look at the social construct and what creates these outcomes, right? So I think ways to shift power and ways to create allyship and consensual agreements is to have hard conversations like this. Is to have people be quiet, listen to each other, have people educate themselves, right, and learn from messing up, right? Shifting systems of power, that's gonna be a lot more difficult, because ain't nobody give up power without a fight. I don't know, anybody who's here is just if somebody makes you feel powerless, it's not gonna be a fight. So I think that we really have to think about equality and injustice in a different way. I think that consensual agreements, and I'm meaning that this is mutual agreements between communities of color and you know, and white supremacy and white privilege and things like that, is how do we shift these structures to equalize this power, right? Equalize the resources, right? And how do we go about addressing this and I'm saying Providence because this is where I'm from, right? In having healthy conversations about this, and not when we start having these like healthy tensions, be scared and run away or become angry. So.
I just want to interject for 1 second. We've had a woman named Ann who's had the mic for a little bit, so I just want to give her an opportunity to make a comment.
Thanks, Ray. There's like a lot to respond to now, more than when I got the mic. I think that, okay, there's a couple of things that I wanted to say. It's hard to try to always be aware, like obviously, if you don't have the privilege, it's much easier to see it. Mm-hmm. And it's a struggle to try to like see it all the time and to try to understand, like when you were saying about the kids in the classroom, realizing, and that's not even the only time it happened to them that day, you know, that every relationship they have, you know, and interaction that they have in the culture, people respond to them in that way. And so it's not like when my kid was little and he got up and ran around the classroom, there was never, you know, is there something wrong in his white home? You know, it's just not an issue. And so there's incredible power in the invisibility of it. And I think that when you were talking about consensual agreements, part of it for me is like, well, there's like this consensual agreement among white people all the time of you know, we do acknowledge, I think, and understand this privilege, but only with each other, you know. But also, I think what this gentleman was saying over here when he was talking about the different schools and things, that a key part, when you were saying, you know, it's just, well, it's all this stuff and we worked hard and that's why we got it. And that is one of the things I think that's really extremely powerful about the problem of white privilege is this mythology of deserving. Oh, we worked hard and we deserved it. And so anybody that doesn't have it didn't work hard for it and doesn't deserve it. And I think that's a place that we need to look at changing how people think about it also, because I think that is really important.
I think that's, I guess that's your way of seeing it, but I see it as actually, my folks are dying and you really need to acknowledge it. So I don't see it as like deserving. I don't see it as, I just don't, because folks are dying. You know, there's collateral damage, there's mass incarceration and from communities of color is targeting specifically like, you know, our communities, right? And I think that it's, for us, is really playing into this very like capitalist and like, you know, like hidden slave system that's out there, but that nobody wants to talk about. That is just an acceptance of a culture, of a white cultural norm and white cultural value, right? That because we don't fit into white cultural values or we're miscommunicated or, you know, people are deserving and, you know, elitist and you know, in those types of ways, that it's okay to lock up, you know, communities of color. It's okay to stop and frisk, you know, one of my youth. It's okay to do all these things. Like that's justifying it. And that's like, that's folks' own internal like way of dealing with it. That's internal. that's not systemic. You know, what we're feeling is systemic. And I think that's an issue. So.
Thank you. I want to thank the panel and thank the people here for speaking as you're suggesting in a way that's communicating and not sort of calling out or hurling. I think if there's a sort of, when you were saying earlier, Marco, that supremacy sort of gives me permission. Well, I'm not a supremacist, I'm short. You know, what the hell, I can't do that. But when we're sort of problematizing these things and looking at them and not only sort of calling out microaggressions, but really looking at how they are in fact the connective thread. So that when you're talking about good for all, it's not good for all if you're tying my hands behind my back and saying, okay, read it. Or like, no, you can read it, it's 4,000 feet away. But those kids who are 2 feet away from it get to see it first. So I think for those of us, I want to own my racism, I don't want to have it, but I think there are continua of, like, I get it, I'm okay, I don't, I grew up in it, so I'm the fish saying, how's the water? I don't know, it's my water, I'm the fish in it. But what I really appreciate about what we're doing is looking at those specific incidents, because I think those of us who try and do educational work and say, well, it's just wrong, but it's like, it's wrong because the kid is 6 and he's moving up and down because he's 6, for the love of God. And how do we work with the teacher how do we not vilify her, or how do we say, no, that's not okay, and in ways that go beyond sort of this judgy, I'm better than you are, or my political stuff is more in order, but how do we specifically look at the kinds of examples that you all are raising?
Just quickly, I want to emphasize, make more prominent a point in the comment that Chanravy just made, is that the result of, like, we're talking about attitudes and this sort of things, but like the result of white privilege / white supremacy is that people of color die, that they go to jail, that really bad thing, like it's not like an inconvenience. So this is like intense, you know what I'm saying? Like they are economically devastated, they are politically oppressed. It's not only just sort of cultural degradation. It's like somebody dies. And I mean, we saw in the video, and we tend to sort of focus on these courtroom glamorized things, but like it happens all the time. And it's not like somewhere else, it's like here in Providence. And DARE does a lot of work around this. We know prison does a lot of work around this. Like so I just want to make clear that we understand that like the result is that people of color die.
I'm going to give the mic over to Shauna in 1 second, and then we'll get back there. But I just want to give one personal, I'm sorry, Shauna's, Sheila. Just one personal experience that kind of bothers me a lot, being of Native American descent. It's when I hear this conversation about, you know, when you come to this country, you're supposed to learn English. And especially being Narragansett, I'm like, well, we were speaking Algonquin way before you got here. So why is it that in my land you're expected to speak English when that's not my particular language or not the language of my people? And I think a lot of what we're talking about is societal norms that a certain group look at as the way it's supposed to be, that doesn't necessarily translate to other communities, especially communities of color, and how that impacts them. And as Marco and Chanravy said, the end result a lot of times is someone dies or their life is ruined. So, Sheila.
Hi, everybody. Oh, this is kind of like, I'm Sheila. I'm actually, right now, I'm the vice chairperson of DARE, and I'm also one of the founders of DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality. Wow, sometimes it's like you don't know what to say because you got so much to say. I'm going to kind of go backwards in my thinking because I wanted to respond to the last woman that spoke over here when you were talking specifically, when you were saying that it's almost a moment like this when I could say I don't want to offend anybody, but I really don't care because that's how important this is. When you said about not vilifying people, you know what? Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And when it comes to a child, and when it comes to someone that's working in education, I worked with children for years, children from newborn to 4 to 5. And if you're not doing what you need to be doing, then you shouldn't be doing it. And if you don't have it right here, that's one of the things we say in organizing. If you don't got it in your gut, then you don't got it. There's some things you can be taught, there's some things you can't. This is just me speaking. And I'm speaking because I remember 1968, Mississippi. But I also remember in the 90s, the 80s, one of my sons being at classical high school and a teacher telling him to go back to Central where he belonged. A teacher telling him, 10 years ago you wouldn't be here, but we got to have so many of you now. And when I saw the video, it touched me because I'm a mother too, and I'm a mother of 4 black sons. And every one of those things I'm afraid of. And that's what a lot of people forget. I'm afraid of every one of them. And a couple of them have, hit home in different ways. And a lot of it, I saw today, I saw the man, actor in the video was speaking, and he was talking about the school to prison pipeline. But he said he made a statement that was just talking about getting on that highway and pushing everybody in a different direction. And I've talked about this at our DARE meeting, the school to prison pipeline, when really a lot of times it's the cradle to prison pipeline, because so many of our children are labeled before they're born. Crack babies, drug babies, urban babies. And, my spiritual and cultural beliefs and ideologies, ain't that deep for me? It's different, and it's me. I've been fighting this fight for a long time, and I really believe that one of the big differences between white privilege and white supremacy is that people are dying. I believe that what Chanravy talked about is like the jokes or the laughs or the acceptances. That's a responsibility that I believe that white people have, is to say no, but to say it strong and to say why. Some things don't need to be, to me, don't need to be explained because they're so obvious that when people are dying, it's not okay. When children are being mistreated, we talked about this last night, I can't sit still in a meeting. I wanted to get up a minute ago and walk around. So why should my 5-year-old be expected to sit down, for 5 hours? Right now in Providence, I believe kindergarten time has been eliminated, recess time to 15 minutes a day. Come on. We don't do that. But if it's one of my grandkids running around, that's right, they're going to want to know what's going on at home. But if they had the same color hair as me or the same skin color, they'd just be saying, she's so cute. Come on, sit over here by the teacher and let's take a minute. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen, with my own kids. And, I think that's the gist of it. When we're talking about, the eyes of racism, the institutional racism, when we're talking about our kids being stopped and frisked. And, you'll see different areas in different neighborhoods when you look at all the maps and the charts. That was 170 first graders suspended last year in that report. Disproportionately, Black and Latino boys. That's not right.
This is on. So I'm Randall Rose, and there was a request earlier from Fred, I think, to give some examples of white privilege, so I'm going to put a face on this. So when Chanravy was talking earlier about this email list and this joking about Asian people and how it was racist and so on, I want to talk about it because I was one of the people on the other side of that. So I'm not going to try to tell any kind of competing story about how I thought I was being anti-racist with what I was saying, because I definitely did not do it right, and really being anti-racist would have required doing something very different from what I was doing on that listserv. But I just wanted to put a face on this without giving a competing story, because you know that what happened there was an example of white privilege and obliviousness by me and other white people to that, and it really did mean that it wasn't a safe space for people of color and a lot of people, in fact, but basically for people of color. So I just wanted to be given mention that I'm an example of that, and I'm trying to learn from it, but it's definitely true that I did not handle that thing right. So if people want to speak more about that, that's fine. I can talk more in discussion about it, or we can just move on. So yeah.
Any responses to Randall?
There's over there. Somebody's over there.
All right.
No, no?
No?
Okay, never mind.
You sure? You know, the mic's yours if you want it, brother. All right.
Yay.
All right.
Hello, my name is Sean, and I work for a government agency here in Rhode Island, and my idea of what really constitutes white privilege is just the ability to act oblivious to things. I mean, I'm one of maybe 6 black men, I mean 7 if you count the 2 Dominican guys, no, 8, that work in my building, you know, that aren't on the janitorial staff. And my building is largely Italian and Irish folk that have been working there as, you know, handed down jobs from family members for years and years and years. And I have a guy in my office who refers to me as his homie. I mean, I don't ask for that, but instead of being referred to as, hey, my colleague, he'll say, and you know, talking to people, well, my homie, Sean. I'm like, first of all, this isn't 1990 New York. Second of all, colleague, that works for me. Or, you know, I had recently another coworker who asked me to go to his son's class and talk about how great it is to be black post-1960s. My response was, if you want me to traumatize your kids by telling them the truth and how much their teachers are actually omitting from their lessons, then absolutely. If you can handle that, I'll sign up to do it. But he really wanted me to kind of go and shuck and jive for them. And I mean, even on a more personal level, every job I've held, I've always had white superiors who have felt the need to look at me as if I'm in need of discipline, training, and I need to be taught a work ethic. So it's like, they're really oblivious to, like, you know, not only their white supremacy, their white privilege, but their patriarchy and what they exhibit, you know, towards the other black people that are around them. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, I can get it. Hi, I'm Esther Kurtz. I'm a second-year grad student here. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I just thought maybe one thing we could kind of talk more about is this idea of the obliviousness versus knowing amongst themselves or ourselves versus denial. And I think it's a really important thing to think about, because at least one way that we can attack this, I think we've been kind of hinting at or talking about, is, for lack of a better way of putting it, educating white people, right? And I've had discussions about this before also with, you know, do they really need to be educated? Don't they already know? And so is it really that they're oblivious to white privilege and white supremacy, or is it a very strong denial? And how do we? I'm very like, I want answers. Like, how can we confront this? Like, what action can we take? And I feel like this, also this question of vilifying, that it's, when we're talking about not vilifying someone, it can be seen as like, oh, we don't want to hurt their feelings, or we want to treat them with respect. And that's not the only reason not to vilify, because there's also this danger that if you do confront people in that way, that they'll just shut down and they'll be completely, unable to or unwilling to even continue the conversation. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't actually like confronted people. Like all the people that I know about white supremacy. I don't know. I don't talk or come into contact with people who I would say really are oblivious, but maybe they're out there I think in the vast majority. I don't know. So I think it's an important thing to talk about or to think about this this question of how do you like show people the truth and talk about the violence that's happening in a way that you're going to actually change the way people think.
One second, Shirley. If I hear you correctly, what you're saying is you'd like to hear kind of about how we address this issue, not in a manner that says, I'm right and you're wrong, but in a manner that actually gets them to see what's going on and proactively change their behavior and how they interact with communities of color, so that we actually do begin to do away with white privilege and white supremacy. Is that correct? Okay.
I would just say that, I don't know if I said it, the word I'm thinking of is kind of a strategic way. That it's not about like, oh, we don't want to hurt their feelings, or like, oh, they deserve to have those. It's not about making excuses for people. It's about how do you strategically confront them with these things.
You do this right now. Like, you have this conversation right here, right now. You address white supremacy in like spaces like this. This is like what is going on, like deconstruction of like, of racism and things like that. Have honest conversations. And to speak to you, Randall, I think that we went back, he was talking about the May Day email that was sent out about a young Vietnamese woman that was a sex worker, and this gay white man sent it out. And all these white organizers had laughed at it, and not realizing that this mass email went through like Northeastern America, including myself, who is an Asian American woman in the context of racial and the social racial construct. But I am a Cambodian woman who is of a result of the Vietnam War here. So, that really hit home, and it was messed up. I think that when folks really, when you do stuff like that in the movement, I think that pisses people off more, because you're supposed to know better, right? People in the movement are supposed to be anti-racist, but I think culturally, when people say that they are, or that they pretend that they are, or they have this one person of color friend, that they're really not. Or they date like a person of color, and they say, oh, that I'm down with the homies. No, you're not. You need to stop it. I think that there are ways to be culturally racist, and you need to practice and keep on practicing, and you need to educate. And you're allowed to mess up. It's okay. There's room for mistakes, right? But I think there's not enough room right now in this conversation to spend on that, because it's kind of like, it's a waste of space. Right now we're talking about like the death of people of color, right? And this dialogue that really needs to be happening on how to address like privilege in a consensual manner, but also, on Brown campus, there was just a Ray Kelly action. This is Ray Kelly from New York, who has been implementing like stop and frisk and racist police policies for Black and Latino males up in New York. And who agreed to bring them here? Brown University. Brown University. Let's address it here. Okay, let's do it. Why aren't all these conferences at Brown open to the community? Right? What is going on with the space? Why can't we come in as communities of color and be in the space and be okay with it? You're living like, you don't pay taxes. You ride our buses for free. Our kids don't get to ride the bus. Like, it's like one of those things like, okay, how much more do you want me to feel bad for you? But I don't want to feel bad, because like all these things are happening, and these outcomes of the system is like affecting like our lived experiences. You have to understand that white privilege and white supremacy is so detached from other people of color, like people of color lived experiences. It's ridiculous and it's dehumanizing. And when you consistently dehumanize people, you become traumatic. I don't understand like where we're trying to like facilitate and like all these things, but it's a social illness. It really is. And we need to learn how to address it. And if it becomes continuous conversations of people wasting people's time, I think that people of color are just gonna get more pissed off. There's gonna be more retaliation. There's gonna be more folks, fighting back, protesting, because there's only so many more young black men, young Latino men, young Cambodian men who are gonna die before something happens. So.
I have one comment right here, and then I'd like to hear from our professors. They've been a bit quiet up on our panel, and I'm not a fan of that. So.
Yeah, I think my point is largely irrelevant now, but yeah, I think we white people at Brown have access to reduced psychological services, and a lot of these internal complexes can be worked out in that context. I don't think they belong here. And yeah, I would like to continue the conversation that I think you're trying to direct us to now.
I'd like to say something.
I'll let you go right after, because I already told them. Yes.
Let her say.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
I just wanted to make sure I was respectful. All right.
Thank you, Professor. I've been sitting here and we talk about white supremacy and white privilege. And white supremacy came about because we had to have slaves, or they felt they had to have slaves. They had to be superior. I'm better than you, you're nothing, you're an animal. So the trickle-down effect from that became white privilege, the fair white maiden, that had lily white. So the boogeyman of terminology is the white supremacist now. It's like, oh, I'm not that. But people still have that white privilege. I remember when 9/11 happened and they started checking people coming through the airport, it was like, oh, wait a minute, I can't be checked, I'm a white person. But we've been checked for years. We got to stop and frisk. So these are the things that they take their privilege for granted. It's because I am a white person, so I am entitled to this. I mean, I look at the fact that I live on the south side of Providence, and the majority of jobs in this state are schools and hospitals, and there's some major hospitals in South Providence, and there's schools all over Providence, but the majority of people working there are white that are making good money. Now that right in itself is a privilege. Why aren't there more black teachers? I think that kid wouldn't be jumping all over the schoolroom if he had some black people or some people looking just like him. I mean, I have a friend that came from South Carolina when she was like 5 years old. She came from a black community and she started school here. She was like 6. And she spent the whole year staring at the white teacher because she'd never seen white people before. So it's kind of like a culture shock for some kids coming from an environment of whatever they're coming from, and then they're like thrown into a different type of situation, different set of rules. So some of these things could be eradicated if, like we had in the 60s and 70s, we worked to help people who didn't have advantage, because two lines running parallel will never meet. So the only way you can catch up, because white people have had privilege since they came to this country. They came here, they tore the country up, they found ways to make money, they couldn't live with anybody. So the only people they had to protect was their own. Then other people who had indigenous people or people from other countries, they had communities, they lived with people side by side. So they're not used to basically the violence. So the only way people can play catch up is if they are given the same opportunities. So as long as the people who have the power, and you can see if you watch the people in DC, how they're trying to maintain that power, or like the Zimmermans and the people like that, we have to change that attitude of, I'm white, and like you said, we've always had terror and violence against the black people, and it's so accepted, and that's the shame. But like I said, we have to the white privilege is just, you take it for granted when you have a job. If you walk into a mall, the majority of people there is going to be whites. You go into hospitals or wherever you go where there's money, it's going to be white. There are so many times we are people of color, we walk into a situation, we're the only one there. I went to Pawtucket Mills and I watched the movie or the thing they had about the slaves that owned in Bristol. I was like 2 or 3 blacks there, 2 floors full of white people. You know, when we walked out of there after watching that, how the Brown brothers and Bristol people brought slaves here, nobody said a word to me. You think it was like the white elephant in the room. They acted like they hadn't even seen the movie, like they turned their head because they didn't want to acknowledge the fact that they were part of that. And as far as Brown University in itself, it had played a big role in slavery, so that really needs to be addressed too. So as long as we keep pretending there's no elephant in the room, it's going to continue to be like it is. Thank you.
As I mentioned, I do want to hear a few words from our professors, and I would like to kind of turn the conversation, because we got about a half an hour left, towards what Chanravy started to speak about, ways that we start to address this. I think we've had some good discussion about what it is and how it impacts, but how do we collectively start to move forward to address this issue? And Chanravy gave some excellent points. So we do have one other individual. I'm going to leave it up to the professors whether they'd like to let him go first or if they'd like to speak first, but they do have to speak. I'm not letting them off the hook. So
Who's the other person?
the gentleman right there. Oh, over here. Oh, goodness. All right. Goodness. All right, we're going to go here first, then there, but then we're going to the professors. Very good.
My name is Alicia, and I'm an intern at the Center for Sexual Pleasure and Health, and I am Portuguese. So in my own little world, I was like, I don't benefit from white privilege, and I was very fortunate that I got the internship at the center, and they opened my eyes to that. The one thing that concerns me, because it kind of put me back, is why is there such a large gap between the definition of white supremacy in the common culture or society outside this door versus in this room? Because at first when I sat down, because I'm a noob to all of this, and they said white supremacy, I was like, oh no, that's not me, I don't do that. But when you break it down and it's in layman's terms, and it's totally understandable that it's the systems that are in place and the rules that are going on, it's like, oh, shit, I am that person. I do benefit from those things. And it's more relatable. So I just wonder why, if we could find a way to explain to society and our friends and family and other people outside these doors that white supremacy doesn't mean you have the KKK outfit in your closet, or that, you do hateful things to people. It's things we do every day, it's the things we benefit from every day. And because to me, once somebody opened that door for me, I was like, this is beautiful, and I benefit so much more from it now, because now I can use my privilege to help other people and not go around oblivious to what was, I was benefiting from. The other problem too is, now that somebody has opened that door for me, I'm looking for these outlets, these opportunities to learn and educate myself, which is coming here, and I've been to another forum earlier in the week. And the problem is, I want to change. Somebody has opened that door for me. How do we reach the people who don't have that opportunity? Because they're the ones that are still implementing the problems, they're supporting the system. So how do we reach those people to say, you benefit from white privilege? This is not, 1955. It doesn't mean you have, a KKK outfit in your closet either. It's basic stuff that still goes on. It's so simple once somebody just opens that door for you, because now it's totally understandable for me. And I can be like, I was that person, and it sucks, but I was blessed that somebody opened that opportunity for me to learn and change and appreciate what I have and help other people have that opportunity as well.
Hi, I want to just agree with what you said about like bringing people, like people who don't have the privilege up to that level of people who have privilege. I come from Queens, New York, and I would say out of all the boroughs of New York City, it is the most diverse. Where I live, I am a minority, and I think because we have so many people together, and because yes, there are ethnic neighborhoods in Queens, but I think a lot of those lines are blurred, and because you have so many different people from different cultures and different privileges coming together, that conversation is very much facilitated. And I think that the conversation definitely has to happen at a local level, because you really need to be around the people and see those differences and have those conversations at a personal level in order to make them effective.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Professor Augusto or Professor Guterl?
Oh, no. I'd be glad to follow you.
Okay. I think I can speak for both Matt and me to say that our posture is deliberate. The posture of listening is deliberate. So it's not like we're trying to elide, but we're trying to learn. It's not often that you get to sit in a hall at Brown and learn from people. You would think that that's what you do all the time, but academia doesn't work that way. You're not necessarily learning from people. So it's a privilege and an honor, and I think both of us were doing it deliberately. I do have lots of comments that I was writing down, so I'll just take two of them. One is about educating white people. Who has the duty to do that is the question I wanted to just put out generally, almost rhetorically, so that everybody could think about that. Sometimes I think before I leave the house in the morning, if white people only knew the tremendous emotional labor that people of color go through every day trying to decide, do I educate white people today about this? Or do I just keep quiet about this? And it's not just me as a professor. It's like, and little kids of color have to make those decisions. Am I going to educate some white adult that it's really not nice, Mr. So-and-so, for you to treat me this way or address me this way? So it's a labor, it's a duty that we're assumed to have to take up right across ages, right across, I would say, various groups of people of color. That, there is a need for educating white people, and we're the ones who are supposed to do it. So I would like to just posit that part of that stress that Chanravy is talking about, and the effect of the stress caused by living in a racist society, comes precisely from that stress of having to decide at critical moments throughout your day, whether you're a child or an adult, do I educate some white person about this particular aspect of what it means to live in a racist society or not? So I want to put out, and the question is not a new question, it's a question that people who participated in earlier social movements in this country have often had to raise. And it sometimes gets to be the fault line in activist organizations. Who exactly is supposed to do this? And I would suggest that it's probably time now in the 21st century to shift that burden a bit, and particularly to shift it off of little kids of color and younger people of color. Okay, for me, all right, I'll take the burden. But no 16-year-old should have to go to school thinking, do I engage in this today? I mean, I've listened to young black women say to me, when we're in class, there may be 3 of us, we actually pull lots before we leave to come to class to decide which of us is going to be the one today, so that the other 2 can take notes and learn. While the one who is, you're the designated, I'm going to teach white people, or I'm going to teach the teacher, or I'm going to teach the professor about what it means to be of color in this society. And then the other 2 can just freely learn that day. But just think about that. Is that, should we in the 21st century, where should that burden be placed? So I just wanted to say that. And it's very difficult to do that even educating the educators in a country of immigrants, because what happens is the foundational history of the country gets elided. So yes, this is a country of immigrants, but not all immigration is equal. Well, first of all, black people didn't choose to immigrate, but let's take the other waves of immigrants. Her circumstance of immigrating, or her parents immigrating, and the circumstances in which they're received, and what is made available by the society to them so that they can participate more fully, not the same as other ways of immigrants. We don't have time to talk about it now, but it becomes sharp for me through work in Brazil, because Brazil and many Latin American countries, which elide the whole thing of racism. There was a policy at a certain point post-slavery called branqueamento. How we're going to whiten the nation. For the young lady who came from Portugal, it may be interesting to pursue this history, but how are we going to whiten the nation? So they did a deliberate thing to bring white immigrants, and their reception in Brazil and in other countries in Latin America is different from the reception of people of color. In fact, Asians were usually barred from immigrating at all. The enslaved people were already there. And not to even mention for the people from whom all of this land is taken, the dispossessed, the Native Americans. So I want to just say that the question of educating, I agree, education is really foundational to all of this, but we have to think about how do we pursue the education, whose burden is it, where do we reach back, and at what point do we start, in history from teaching it. The second one is about health, because we talked a lot about education, but implicit in some of the dilemmas of children of color in education is the question of health and health disparities in the country. And so I was thinking a couple of times people raised the question of dehumanization. I think this is also a foundational point in terms of teaching and organizing. What does it mean when we live in a society that has a differential definition of who's human? And it impacts on health because your diagnosis is going to be different, and there are plenty of studies that will show this. Your diagnosis is going to be different, your path of treatment is going to be different, your symptoms may be ignored or they may be taken up. You may be given painkiller or you may not be given painkiller. You may live in a community where you're almost forced to be obese, like on a Native American reservation or in certain Latino communities where there ain't no grocery store that's selling anything other than a can of tomatoes and a few onions. So these questions about health, as well as the questions about education, circle around back, I think, to how certain bodies get defined, how certain notions about who is human and who is not, down to the little child who is hyperactive if black, but acting like a child should act if not. These questions about health and the body and who gets treated as what kind of human being are also important. So those are my two notes and comments.
Thank you very much, Professor Augusto. Professor Guterl.
I think it's important at every step to remember the human cost, right? So that's the end game here, is to reduce, if not eliminate, the human cost that's a consequence of all of this, and to use what we can, right? And the problem is just so immense and so huge and so much bigger than Providence school systems or the East Coast or the US. It's global, it's structural, it's complex, it hides itself, it doesn't want to be talked about. One thing that we can do, which is what Tony's done, is to break down barriers in local communities that have existed for a while. But we can also work to make sure that something like this keeps happening, that in 5 years, some of the same people that are here now are back again, and the conversation's been ongoing, that this isn't a one-off thing, that we don't forget what we've heard or what we've talked about. When I have 120 students that pass through my classroom twice a week, and my role in combating this larger system and in trying to reduce this human cost is very abstract, right? Like, I get to talk to them, and I get to make them think, and think hard about what those systems do and how they work. And sometimes in those classes, not here, but elsewhere, students say stupid things, as students sometimes do, none of you. At those moments, I have to act proactively, right? No offense is too minor to warrant an intervention. No conversation is too insignificant to not be a teachable moment. I've removed students from classes and taught them privately, essentially in a parallel structure, as if they've used racial epithets in the classroom or have said things that are offensive to others. I mean, you have to do what you have to do, I think, in order to ensure that every single interaction you have is aimed at reducing that human cost. And if your goal in life is to sort of teach Plato and all of its complexity, that's one thing. But for those of us who are in the interdisciplines or in Africana studies and American studies and women's and gender studies and all of the cognate fields, you know, a part of our responsibility here is to reduce that human cost in everything, right? So to be a part of this kind of conversation, to listen, and also to learn, to meet with students in and out of the classroom, to engage people at libraries, wherever we encounter them, and to try to do the best we can at that very abstract level, you know, and when and where we choose or can, at a much more upfront level, at a much more direct level, right, to make a difference.
We are running very low on time, so I want to take 2 to 3 more comments from the audience, and then I'm going to ask our panelists just to give some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. So I saw someone's hand right here. Would you want to grab the mic, Ray?
Hey, so my name's Jenny. I'm a little lightheaded because I have a burrito waiting for me. It's awkward, so I actually need it. But I just wanted to say a few notes about being a Brown student. It's just, I wanted to talk more generally about whiteness. And I like to think of it as like I feel everybody in this room has some type of investment in it. And I feel like we've invested in whiteness. I feel like I've invested in whiteness by coming here. I feel like my parents invested in whiteness the day that they came to America and decided to like make a living here. And I think if we shift the, I'm hoping that we can maybe shift the conversation a little bit to like talking about how all of us are part of this, because I think everyone in this room has something to say about like their investment in whiteness and like why have we not stopped investing in it as Brown students? Like why is it that after last semester, like I had people coming up to me telling me like they are a student of color and they would like to see Ray Kelly speak because it was their right as a Brown student to hear him speak. That is not a right. You are investing in whiteness. And so I just wanted to throw that in.
Anyone else from our audience? That's a very good comment. We have one right back here.
I kind of want to talk more about how she said who carries the burden. I think we all carry the burden as Spanish people, as colored people. I feel like for me at least, I've taken advantage of white privilege because I look white. I might not be white, I'm Guatemalan, but I look white. So when a cop stops me and my sister and they talk to me, we get away with whatever we're doing, you know? Which is very hard for me because I look white, but my sister does not. My sister's 100% Guatemalan, just like me, but she looks Asian. All her friends are Asian. She fits in that circle perfectly. She looks Asian. She loves the fact that we are part Asian, like a little bit. So it's been very hard for me because I see the difference of the way we are treated. I've always been treated different than she was, even in school. I had a problem with a teacher a long time ago where he thought I was white and he would treat Spanish people differently. And I've always been taught to be very outspoken. So the day I spoke out for this person, he came up to me and he was like, "That's not your place." And I was like, "It is my place. I'm a Spanish person and I will defend my culture." So for me, it's been very hard because going to like the doctors, I have a daughter who is 17 months and she's short, she's tall for her age, but she's like blonde, curly hair, blonde. And we went to doctors and they're like, why she's listed as a Hispanic. And I was like, me and my boyfriend, we're both Hispanic. You know, she's just white, light skinned. So it's been very difficult. So I think it's a burden we're all gonna have to carry. My daughter's gonna carry it because me and my sister carry it. And it's sad, but it's the way it is. That's one of the things I wanted to say. I get really nervous.
One more comment right in the back right there, sir. Please come grab the microphone.
Hi, I'm a physics grad student. Doesn't matter what my name is. Anyway, I worry. I'm just a part of it. Anyway, I worry there might be systemic problem. I missed the earlier part, so I hope I didn't miss anything. I worry there might be systemic problem in that it benefits our capitalist monetary society to have racism. Racism profits the very elite. For example, the deadliest war that I found out people didn't know, the deadliest war since World War II was over 5 million people killed in Democratic Republic of Congo just recently, last decade or so, to make iPhones, iPads, to benefit the very, very few, the very, very elite. And prisons are for private systems. So as long as people make money when you have racism, benefit from racism, how do you remove it? I don't know. I worry it might be fabricated into our entire socioeconomic structure. In order to get rid of it, you have to destroy that. Unless I have one conjecture, if we change our vision, our wavelength patterns in our visual perception, so you don't perceive color differently, if we don't perceive color at all, or if we have a skewed different wavelengths that we perceive, will that eliminate the problem? I don't know. Maybe investigate how blind community interact with each other. I don't know.
No, thank you very much, sir. You got to think outside the box. Thank you very much. All right, let me see what we're looking like on time. Yeah, we technically have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to swing it on back to our panelists and ask them all for just last thoughts on the conversation that we've had tonight, and where we plan to go from here, or where we should be going from here. Oh, he has some. Okay, yeah. Last one. We'll take the last one.
I just want to say something about. I'm Andy. I'm a first year at Brown, and I just want to say that to go off of what we were saying about how death is such a huge thing that affects people of color. I just want to say that. That whole idea goes beyond physical death, and I think this kind of death is everywhere. I come from the south side of Chicago in the Bridgeport neighborhood. It has been known as an extremely racist neighborhood, and I was silenced because I faced verbal persecution on the streets for simply being of Asian descent, and this silence. I think this is a form of death. It's a sort of like insidious force that I think, can really just kill people on the inside. And it's death, obviously physical death is extremely, extremely awful. But I think death can exist anywhere where there's an issue involving race and things like that. I think it happens everywhere, including on this campus. People are silenced all the time, and it's not only just silence, it's just other forms of just trying to oppress people. And I think these sorts of oppression are essentially killing people, I think. And I don't want to belittle death at all, but I'm just saying that, oppression is oppression, and that's what it is, and it's harmful, and it exists everywhere.
Thank you, sir. All right. We'll swing it on over to our panelists.
Should we go down the line? Or?
However you'd like.
Start with you. I'll close by saying that, this is an interesting question. I would go for option A, by the way. We have to understand that this issue that we're talking about, this problem that we're talking about, that the country, the very nation, this America is founded upon and understands its existence through maintaining this problem. So in order to actually change this, and this is either scary for people or it appears so grand that it becomes paralyzing. It's like, I don't even know how to approach that. Is that we actually have to fundamentally restructure the way this society operates. And that's huge. When the professor talks about the black freedom struggle, they were saying no, the whole this, it's gotta come down and we gotta build something new. That means we gotta be very creative. You have to become an artist. Because the thing that you have to build can in no way reproduce and mimic the old system. Otherwise, it simply reifies and reinstates those old structures, and we're used to that. Right? We think about this notion of education and what do we do? Because when you have people in the system who their existence is based on maintaining the system, That's a hard, yeah, you're gonna get defensive when you telling me my way of being can't be that way. My entire cosmology needs to change, the way I have understood the ordering of the universe. That's huge. That's a huge question. And as a revolutionary, I'm like, no, like brown as we know it must come down and something else must be built. What does that look like? I don't know. Let's all get together and be creative and figure it out. I know we got some artists in the room. We just need a new sheet of paper. We've been trying this for 500 years, man. We know what it does. 500 years. It's not just the U.S., it's Central America, South America, it's global. We have to build something new. It can't be capitalist. It can't be based on anti-blackness, because when other ethnic minorities come in, they fit somewhere in this hierarchy and they start, everybody jockeys for position. Why am I being treated like I'm black? This is the unspoken. But we know what that means. So I'm like, yeah, I'm with the physicists over there. I'm like, yeah, we need to build something new. He's a physicist. He's used to building stuff new. You know.
Thank you, Marco.
I am all for the revolution. I am all for rebuilding, restructuring, reorganizing, rehumanizing people. Because I think that we take away, with these structures, we become more dehumanized. We take away value from humanity. And we separate people and their experiences based on monetary value, right? To make the system keep working. We leave our ethics and our morals out to make the system keep working. We don't come from a place of love. We don't come from a place of solidarity and family to keep this place working. Dr. Augusto was saying that you're a black mother. You don't understand what it is to be a black mother. I don't think any of you white folks will ever understand unless you have a mixed race baby, right? So I think when we talk about revolution, we have to talk about family. We have to talk about gender. We have to talk about the role of women in families, which is very important. And we have to talk about relinquishing power, right? From the white community. Relinquishing power means you give up the power. We don't want to keep fighting you.
That's right.
It's either we take it or you give it up, right? There's only two ways out of it. And I think that there are allies out there that are great allies and have been working to deconstruct this racism from a very loving place, from a very human place. And we know who all those people are, but we have to think differently about humanity. We have to think differently about raising our kids. I'm a mother. I'm a single mother. I am the oldest of 26 grandkids. I'm the first to graduate college in my family. I'm the only first generation, right, of this Cambodian family that has graduated. And my family is still struggling. We're still young, 3 generations in 40 years now. We're still impoverished. There's a lack of education, and it's all this system, So I don't want to see my daughter raised in a system where I know she's going to struggle because she's disabled. And I know that she's going to, face all these systems. So, it's hard, right? It's a culture, and this normative culture that we keep, submitting ourselves to. And in Rhode Island, and specifically in Rhode Island, we have a very colonial, mindset where we're like, oh, it's okay for a white person to run a people of color organization and say that they're all about racial profiling and yeah, for deportation. What the hell do you know about deportation? And it hurts me because I'm like, and you say stress, right? Because either you sit and you educate or you don't. And if I choose not to educate in this space, then somebody goes and some community loses out, Yeah. And it becomes a picking and choosing of humanity in issue-based things. Why are these issues separate? LGBTQ issues, deportation issues, racial profiling issues, police state violence issues should not be separate. It's all humanity. This is what we're dealing with. And because we silo things as human beings to deal with them better, and it's really based on white cultural values in society, that's a problem. So I'm all for the revolution, and I'm all for love.
Thank you, Chanravy.
You know, I'm glad they're younger, because I need their energy to sustain. But it strikes me that you know, this gap between reform and revolution is a really profound one, and it's kind of lingered over this conversation here today. Like, do you blow it all up, or do you try to fix it? And I wanna, no, I know, but I wanna change it, because it seems to me that the work we all do in our everyday lives, you know, whether you're confronting a guy at the water cooler, or you're talking to your students privately, or you're intervening in a domestic dispute, or you're showing love to your neighbors, or you're helping the kid across the street out at a moment where he might get in trouble, that all of those things are a kind of triage. And that's the kind of work we should all be engaged in on a day-to-day basis, that we can plot the revolution and plan to blow things up, but in the meantime, we have to do the day-to-day work of taking care of each other and taking care of the human beings in this room and that appear in front of us. And I think we can call that reform if we want, but I'd prefer to think of it as a kind of triage. And I think that's, for me, that's a better way to think about it. The work I do in the classroom is a kind of humanistic triage.
Thank you, Professor. And for our last word of the evening, Professor Augusto.
I was sitting here quietly having a teacher's fantasy. And the teacher's fantasy is, I'm thinking, boy, it sure would be nice if we could construct a course. There was something, and I'm fiddling here with the titles. Race, Providence, and the Nation. Dehumanizing and rehumanizing. But what would be different is that it would be team taught, you know, we talk about team teaching, and it would be people from the community into the classroom, doing the teaching side by side with professors who were interested in this. So I'll just leave the fantasy out there.
Okay. I think Brown students, I think you guys have a challenge to take from this meeting tonight. It sounds like something that can definitely be accomplished. On that note, we have expended our time here this evening. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, the Mount Hope Neighborhood Association, Providence Youth Student Movement, and the Providence Africana Reading Collective, we want to thank you for coming out tonight and being a part of this very, very important dialogue. We do hope that in some form or fashion you were educated tonight, and perhaps some of the plight that people of color face, not just from white supremacy, but also from white privilege, and perhaps even how you might benefit from it and also be supporting it. As we mentioned from the beginning, this dialogue tonight was about how we move forward. And it has to be tough discussions that take place, because the truth is a tough thing and it's not always a nice thing. But if we're gonna fix what's going on in our society, we have to be truthful with each other, and we have to be loving towards each other, and we have to be able to acknowledge when we've been playing a role in what's going on that's negatively affecting others. So thank you. Thank you very much, friends. Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, you got here a little late, Papa John Prince, fantastic organizer, City of Providence. Professor Bogues actually said that he was looking forward to this being an ongoing series of these types of dialogues. And I'll say from my perspective and the planning committee's perspective, we specifically wanted this location because we looked at this as the community reclaiming space here at Brown. We're breaking down that invisible ivory wall. And I also want to say to the Brown students here, thank you for having us. So I think this is how we move forward. I think these are the type of dialogues we want to continue having. And once again, I'm going to reiterate, Brown students, you have a challenge that has been put out there by one of your visiting professors. Perhaps our next dialogue is about what steps have been taken to make that a reality and how the community supports that. So thank you very much, and Aquani, peace be with you all this evening.